Right, welcome to a compendium of Fab's collectability. See what I did there, right? But titling aside, right, over the course of the next 3 videos, not including this one, these are the topics that I want to cover. A history of Fab's collectible elements, the worth of a collectible card in Flesh and Blood, and then does collectability really work in Flesh and Blood, right? But in the case of this video, starting off, well, I want to sort of just talk, right? Talk for 10 minutes or so about my opinion on Fab's current collectability and of course reprints, because it is a very hot button topic at the moment. And it's good to establish context and background, right? Especially again with a opinionated subject like this, because everyone has sort of their own viewpoints when it comes to, do we want reprints? Do we want reprints of certain cards? Do we want high rarity reprints of certain cards? There's, again, lots of different ways to spin it, and, it's something that people regularly talk about, especially because Flesh and Blood is a very player-driven game. It is very safe to say at this point in time, it is a player's game, not a collectible game, right? There are collectible play pieces, and there are still pieces worth, a decent chunk of money, but generally speaking, the market share is majorly for the play piece. And that's sort of why we get expensive play pieces. And again, although they are, expensive, they're not as expensive as they kind of should be, right? At least, again, in my personal opinion, because that's what we're utilizing for today's video. But this also gives us a little bit of leeway for, any sort of subject matter you specifically want me to cover, right? If you have, thoughts or opinions or, again, stuff you want me to sort of dig into and sort of, well, I guess, investigate, right? So, generally speaking, when it comes to all these subjects, history of Fab's collectible elements, easy enough to do. We're just going to look through the sets, look through all the different factors and elements that LSS have tried to inject into Flesh and Blood, because there is a lot. Almost every set gets some sort of tweak or refinement as LSS continue to try and establish a proper collectible element for Flesh and Blood. In terms of the worth of a collectible card, this is a more numbers-focused one, right? Which is something I like. But when it comes to looking at the numbers, I'm not a normal markets guy, right? I like to try to strip away variables and sort of create more comparable numbers. So in terms of the worth of collectible card, for me, it's the market share. It's how much value of the packs does it absorb, right? So if we look at, for instance, 2 cards, does it, hold a reasonable share of the potential amount of packs it would take to open that, right? Because that, to me, is what actually reflects the worth of a collectible card. If we look at certain other TCGs, it's around 10 to 20%. The majority of collectible cards, so the higher chase stuff for Flesh and Blood, barely pushes 7% of, again, the price of packs to open it, right? Again, in a controlled setting where we are hitting the rates as they are, not, getting lucky and finding something. But again, by doing that for every single card, then we get to a comparable amount. And again, it shows that Flesh and Blood, a lot of the money goes towards the play pieces more so than the collectible pieces. There's not that big enough divide where, again, the play pieces stay cheap and the collectible elements are, well, actually collected, right? Now, then that brings us to, of course, that last element of, does collectability really work in Flesh and Blood? And that is definitely a lot more divisive. We can throw some numbers in there. For me, the easiest way to sort of break it down would be to look at the lowest variant of card, the highest variant of card, and, how much of a gap there is. Because, again, for something to be collectible, to me personally, it should have a premium to it. And if that premium is not, a reasonable amount in contrast to how hard it is to pull towards the original, then it just goes to show that these aren't desired to, hold and collect. They're desired to play. And that means that the lowest variants are getting drawn up because, again, people just want a copy to play overall. Now, in terms of reflecting on my thoughts and opinions towards collectability and, of course, reprints for Flesh and Blood, we'll start off by, my journey, right? I got into the game in a collectible sense. I was collecting modern MTG, then obviously got heavily bloated and oversaturated and really, really hurt my wallet with collector boxes. So at that point, I could buy, 12 packs or a case of Flesh and Blood. So I bought cases of Flesh and Blood. And up until Fab 2.0, I not only bought cases to open and, try to get, basically everything in a set. To date, the only set that I've accomplished that is weirdly Crew First Ed, which is kind of cool in itself, right? Thanks to the cheeky Arknight pull. That was this year. I think that was this year. But, right, so I go into the game as a collector. As a collector, I was opening cards, building a collection, but also sitting on Seal. we then get to Fab 2.0. Drastic changes for Flesh and Blood. A little bit of a crack in the surface when, we got the print runs of Monarch, Tales, and then, the axing of Unlimited Everfest, and we rationalized and realized that maybe Flesh and Blood was overhyped, right? And at that point, for me personally, I didn't care about Sealed, right? I basically just slowly tore through everything I had stockpiled when it came to Sealed, and that was it for me, right? I'd stopped collecting Sealed. I still open, the majority of sets. I still open a reasonable amount to try and hit the majority of things. I usually go for, the speculated Fable rate since we don't have it actually declared. But generally speaking, I still view myself as a collector. I do play the game. At that point in time, I wasn't actually playing the game. I was just opening packs. I maybe played a game here or there, kitchen table with family and friends. But I was primarily a collector. Do I still sort of view myself as that? No. I'm going to say no. I have pieces, I have decent stuff, right, in terms of old and, valued and stuff I want to seek out. But my mentality has always been, if it's something I truly want, I really would just rather open it. If I don't get it, oh well. We roll the dice, we didn't get lucky, brute life, all that, right? But, generally speaking, if I was to honestly view myself today, I would say I'm not so much a collector, right? Yeah, I still buy a decent chunk. Yeah, I still rip a decent chunk of packs. But in all earnest, all I care about is having all the play pieces, right? And yeah, it's probably smarter at this point if I do swap over to just buying master sets, right? Lowest variant, so that, again, I have everything. There's not enough fun in that for me, and I think I'd still, play Flesh and Blood regularly, but it would kill some level of enjoyment. So yeah, I will still open packs, but I generally, trade or get rid of the more expensive stuff just so I can flesh out majority of the set. And, it's not as impactful as it was in older sets. And I think that sort of speaks a lot as well, because again, you look at the Hunted. You have Quick Dodge Flexes and Shelter from the Storm, both commanding a huge price, especially at the time. Whereas you go back a little bit, and you could probably, trade a Marvel from the set for a playset of some of the more expensive play pieces from the set. And that's sort of something that we're continuing to see throughout sets. They usually recline a little bit, especially on the more niche cards. Take Conqueror of the High Seas, for instance. How expensive that was at the start of High Seas to what it is now. But generally speaking, again, it's just that play pieces hold such a big market share when it comes to any given card in any given set. So overall, for me, it's worth holding on to something that I pull, but there is no way I'd really go out of my way to get something, right? To get something specific from a set. Yeah? Does that sort of make sense? So that's my sort of vantage point currently, how I feel towards sets, how I feel towards, purchasing sets. When it comes to the actual idea of collectability and reprints, I think reprints are drastically needed. Because again, the best way for them to separate those two elements is to make the play pieces worth less, right? So the idea that a card holds value because it is in demand for play, to me, is not a great reason for it to be a valued collector's piece, right? Take Tunic, for instance. You have the cold foil, worth a pretty penny. You have, of course, the promo, the EA, worth a very pretty penny. And then you have everything else sort of sandwiched together, right? And there is not a great divide between a Klloo first, a Welcome to Rathe Rainbow Foil, Evo, reprints, etc. Because the card is there to be played, right? That is the viewpoint. And I would honestly like to see, obviously, some clearer separation between sets, some, old valued this, right? But, in that same scope, Fab's not that old. For Klloo, for Welcome to Rathe, for Unlimited, to command a premium to it, it's too soon, right? Plain and simple. But when it comes to, for instance, like Shelter from the Storm, if you really rationalize it and you really think about it, the EA being as low as it is, and I'm going to say low, is a problem, because that is meant to be the chase variant. That's meant to command a respectable amount. And then the other pieces are meant to be nice and easy to have, hold, and play with, right? But they're simply not. Because again, the elements get conflated because by and large the community is player-driven, and therefore the value is player-driven, not chase-driven. So regardless of how hard it is to pull XYZ, again, it's what's in demand rather than what is actually by LSS designed to be a chase collectible element by pull rate. And that is the biggest problem for me personally with Flesh and Blood at the moment, is all the collectible elements do not get valued in a proper collectible sense. And it will be very interesting to see come Compendium of Rathe with the reprints, especially the Fable reprints, what exactly happens. Because, if they go to nothing, unfortunately, there will be some growing pains, and the rainbow foil, Ivophidia, will probably tank, right? Because that's just how it will have to be for a little while until we get past that, until we get, again, the mentality sort of shifting, and for there to be a better divide between, again, what is a collector piece and what is a play piece. Now, depending on how LSS obviously handle the rates, it may not happen. Ivophidia, whatever other two fables get reprinted in the Antiquity Pack, might be extremely hard to pull, and they might just, curb the needle rather than making it drop, which is generally what seems to be LSS's approach across the board to how they handle some of the more core reprints. They aren't trying to completely nuke the value, they're just trying to stop it getting out of control, right? Which makes sense. It shows a little bit of respect towards, again, people who have, forked out a pretty penny for your CNCs, Shelter from the Storm, etc. But again, it's something that sort of is just a hurdle that has to be overcome, or I guess in this case, tripped over, right? To really then start making progress towards a proper collectible dynamic within the game. I think foils exemplify it the greatest, right? There is barely any premium to the majority of foils, despite foils being, I think it's like 5 or 6 times harder to pull, right? So that's quite the contrast when you think about in a collector sense. So yeah, for me personally, reprints are a harsh reality that are needed to try to correct the course, rather than, again, trying to, slowly divide certain elements through, again, more EAs, more different variants of any given card. They really just have to establish that the play side is a little bit cheaper, and then start, having the community shift value. I mean, to get into economics, right? The best way to have an uptick of spending is to make what they usually buy cheaper, right? Because people generally can't help themselves, and you've got that extra cash. You're spending 25% less on groceries. Now you got a little bit to play with, right? So if play pieces come down, then over the course of a little bit of time, and this is the unfortunate side of it, over the course of a little bit of time, hopefully that money then gets pushed back into the actual collectible side of the card game. The other factor of that is, for instance, Silver Age and the stacks and stacks of cold foil chaff, right? Not really going to move the needle because the majority of equipment isn't going to be playable. It's not going to become any more playable than it is, right? Especially with, proper tuned equipment for Sage coming through the chapter decks and most likely Compendium of Rathe. I can't see, a huge amount of old school cold foils upticking because, again, currently they are just viewed as glorified play pieces rather than, showy, collectible play pieces. So overall, that's the dynamic that, for me personally, needs to happen, right? Play pieces have to fall so that, again, the money can go elsewhere. And yeah, a lot of people are gonna lose, right? I mean, for instance, the card I always look at and I always regret not doing anything with is I have a rainbow foil Tome of Farenda, right? And that has just sunk over the course of however many years it's been, right? Because, it was great, then the ban got worse, and then just a lack of care / a lack of memorability, right? I doubt the majority of the community, no, I won't say majority, I doubt half, 40% of the current community even knows what Tome of Farenda was, right? Because, again, it's burnt, right? There are no records of it anymore. The library's been destroyed. All those old school books are just an afterthought. And even when it comes to some of the higher collectible elements, that's the same sort of scenario, same sort of case, right? I don't think most people would know the serialized art cards existed from Dusk Till Dawn because they were just far and few in between. And the current, sort of place for collectability is it doesn't change hands a whole lot, right? There's not people who buy it to really sit on it unless they're planning to sit on it for years. But again, if you're throwing around the reasonable amount of money that, for instance, a Marvel New Moon is, or again, one of the serialized artist cards from Dusk Till Dawn. I think you also have the rationale that Fab's not the game to do that in, right? So I think across the board, they change hands a little, but obviously not as much as some other card games where, cool, I can buy, this Pokemon card, this signature Riftbound card, this full art Luffy from One Piece, and then, sit on it for a year, 2 years, and make something on it, right? That's not the case for Fab, because again, the collectible side has just suffered and suffered and suffered, right? And become a little bit conflated with the actual play pieces. So yeah, that's my current viewpoint. So I do think reprints are necessary. It does hurt, right? When Tunic got reprinted, it hurt. When Art of War, Tome of Farendale, Cash In even got banned, right? Because Cash In was a couple dollars on a rare, if not more, right? But yeah, that's just the way it has to be. Unfortunately, that's my current viewpoint. So yeah, as someone who does have these cards, as someone whose collection is going to dwindle in value in that sense, I do think it is a necessary part of the game. And if your whole, thought case for your card is, I don't want this reprinted, not because it's a collectible card, but because it has value, because it's in such high demand for play, I think that's the wrong mentality to have when it comes to collectability for Flesh and Blood. You got a first Ed Cold War Tunic, that's going to stand on its own. You got a Rainbow Fall Tunic, yeah, it should have a slight premium to it, but at the end of the day, it probably won't, right? So yeah, in order for the game to flourish and grow, this is sort of the path we have to continue down. And again, I do think it will be healthier in the long run if there is a bit more of a separation, and the best way to again, establish that, in my personal opinion, is to make the play side more affordable, to free up more cash, and then try to hope that the community does right and injects that back into the collectible side, right? Again, if your Rune Team deck halves in price, I think a lot more people will then be, looking to splash out and try to bling it out and have it a bit more showy, right? Some will not care whatsoever, but again, that's sort of the mentality I hold at the moment. So, yeah, let me know your thoughts. Again, the 3 following videos will cover a history of Fab's collectible elements, the worth of a collectible card in Flesh and Blood, and then try to answer, does collectability really work in Flesh and Blood? All in the perspective that reprints are coming, and again, in my opinion, it is the healthy direction for the game. It will have some growing pains, but oh well, right? I think almost every big decision has brought about growing pains, but look at where Fab's at now. So ultimately, it does seem to work out, right? Let me know what you think. If you've got any sort of thoughts or directions you want me to chase around in, let me know. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. See ya.